Welcome to our, we haven't really come up with a name yet. We welcome any thoughts that any listeners might have. For now, we call it the Monos Podcast. This is a minor league prospect podcast that is more fantasy and dynasty league centric, but happy to talk about anything baseball and minor league baseball related. This is my podcast partner, Matt Whitlock. My name is Tino Ganasius. We're going to try to talk a lot about minor leaguers and what we see as the, I don't know what methods are being used to evaluate minor league players, what we think could change or be different, what we think works, but really just kind of have fun with minor league baseball. Matt, a little bit about yourself. What brought you to baseball?
Are you gonna give the background for Monos? So and I think we should explain your hat too. So I'm infamous for making text blunders, and I don't turn off my autocorrect either. So I get some funny autocorrects there as well. So why he's Castillo Pitt is at the start of the year when we were looking at Castillo at Pittsburgh. I tried to abbreviate his name Castillo from Pittsburgh, and it came out as Castillo Pitt on the text, and that became his team name. And I think early on when we were talking about minors, that was my other major typo was minors for Monos. So we just started calling minors Monos now.
We should also add that Matt is a tenured professor at Seattle University with an incredible ability to spell, and I like to poke at typos, so that's where some of that stuff came from.
Yeah, it's funny.
Good times.
We come up with some good ones. All right, so my background, I started getting into fantasy baseball around the year 2000, and I joined a league of a bunch of friends from high school. We moved it to a keeper league, a more or less hybrid keeper league in the maybe 2005, mid-decade. And then we kept increasing. We ultimately moved from Yahoo to Fantrax and set up a league where we actually make it purely hybrid, where it's 15 we keep, 15 we roster with 5 minor league slots. So Tino joined. You probably joined around 2010 when I moved from Seattle. He saw me in his coffee shop where I was supposed to be writing and grading, but he saw my stat tracker up more than my grade sheets.
So, and you went from being an Expos fan to a Nationals fan to what would you call yourself now?
I know fantasy baseball kind of makes me kind of widens the spectrum there. When I grew up as a Expo fan, and then I moved to DC in the year 2000, right when the Expos came to DC. So I thought it was kind of cool that happened. And I kind of followed the Nats until they won it all a few years back. And then I always liked the underdogs, so it got kind of boring. Now they're underdogs again, so that's why I have the shirt. So that's where I'm at, and I was happy with the trade, the Soto trade, just because again, following minors, I like the group of minor leaguers that they got in that trade.
Awesome. So I'm a lifelong Mariners fan. I can't say that fantasy baseball has changed my Mariners fandom at all. I think I root for Mariners, and then I root for individual players. I started playing fantasy, I guess my earliest memories is in 7th grade, which would have been 1989 or 1990. And what we did was we selected players, and then we had to record our own stats or points off of the newspaper. And that's kind of where it started for me. I played a ton of Dynasty League and Pursue the Pennant baseball, which is a dice and card game, kind of like Stratomatic. That was what we did in the science room at lunch most of the time in high school, which made us super cool. Uh, definitely did not help the social life at all, but that's what I wanted to do with my time, and I loved it. So I grew up going, my first memories of Mariners games was seeing Jim Presley and Alvin Davis and Phil Bradley. My grandparents had a neighbor who was a DJ on the radio, and he would get tickets. Steve Slayton, I think was his name. I think it was KISW, the rock station in Seattle. But shout out if Steve ever hears this. But he used to get tickets, and he took me as a little kid to Mariners games. Mother was a single mom, didn't have time, or probably didn't have any interest either. And it was a lot of fun. So Jim Presley, Alvin Davis, Phil Bradley, and then some of my favorite Mariners growing up, Mike Jackson, the old reliever, who I think had more notoriety with the Giants and the Phillies. I just loved his swag and his slider. Obviously Griffey, kind of my hero. And then the other Mariners shout outs are, I used to hold my bat really level to the ground like Scott Bradley did, the old left-handed hitting catcher for the Mariners. And for whatever reason, I loved Greg Briley, who was their left fielder for a time being. One other baseball anecdote, I went to the University of Michigan, Michigan grad, got there in 95 as a freshman, and immediately my hallway, I realized out of 56 guys, about 30 of them were from the New York area. And I was scared shitless. I didn't know a soul going to Michigan, and I realized that they were sports fans, and I won the hearts of a lot of the guys on my hall immediately because I could recite the entire 25-man roster of the 86 Mets. And they thought that was the coolest thing, that this random kid from Seattle could recite the entire roster. But it was a way for me to make friends, that in the basketball court. Let's see. So one of the things that I think, or one of the topics that we want to cover over time with this pod is that scouting, or minor league scouting, and especially dynasty scouting, you've got what I consider two ends of the spectrum, right? You've got those who are looking purely at numbers and using numbers as predictive for what they can do in the major leagues. And then you've got the old traditional scouts that are looking at physical traits and physical skills and what they see on the field. And those two sides have been very much adversarial for a long time. I think, in the early 2000s with Moneyball and some of the other stuff that came out, those two sides were at odds. And what Matt and I have talked about, and we thought would be a really great kind of base for a pod, is that the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right? You've got very numbers heavy prospect lists like James Anderson and RotoWire, where you see the prospects go up and down on the list based on their statistics in that particular moment. And then Matt, what would you consider a pretty scout heavy prospect list?
Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, and both of them have pretty tight connections with front offices and scouts.
Right. So I think for us, it's about kind of trying to understand where that middle ground is, and trying to be as, I think, objective as possible. And we don't have any real investment in being more pro scout or more pro statistic. I think really what we want to do is win our fantasy leagues. And so whichever one, or whichever combination of the two makes most sense, is what we want to tout, and is how we're building our prospect list. So we're here to share some of those methods and our thought process around the methods, as well as real lists that you can use over the course of the season and the off season. I think we will continue to provide our top 20 pretty often, if not every podcast, as they adjust, just to give listeners something kind of in real time, as opposed to the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and the end of the season. One note that I'd like to add as well is that I think both of us watch quite a bit of minor league video and minor league baseball, and that's our way of being able to scout. So we'll be adding some of the video, not content, but what we pick up on video as we go. So Matt, we were both going to share one prospect that we kind of grew up loving and maybe potentially did something different than what scouts thought, and then talk a little bit about how that might be different in 2022. Who's your prospect?
Okay, so the background to this, being an Expo fan, growing up as an Expo fan, I kind of clung on to the Expos because my grandparents had ties to Canada, and I thought it was cool to have a Canadian team. I didn't like fair weather local fans, so I grew up in the Bay Area. I rebelled against the Giants and the 49ers. So I chose Gary Carter and the Expos to grow up with, more or less, and he did the baseball bunch with Johnny Bench, so that was cool to see on Saturdays. So the biggest heartbreak of Expo fandom is when Carter inevitably got traded in the offseason, I think '84, and it was Herm Winningham, Hubie Brooks, Mike Fitzgerald, and then Floyd Yeomans. And so this was the moment that I started to pay attention to the minor leagues, because Yeomans had a lot of hype behind him. I think it was the '82 draft. Gooden was selected by the Mets, first round, pick 5, and then Yeomans was right after him in round 2 for the Mets as a prospect. Yeomans was always seen as having just as electric stuff as Gooden, but the big issue with him was control. So I was excited to see this new group come in, but most of them were knowns, right? Winningham was more of a defensive center fielder, filling out the middle there. Brooks was third base, with the Mets moving to shortstop with the Expos, and that was cool. He was a known, and I liked that they were giving him a shot at a key position. But Yeomans was kind of the attraction there because of what Gooden did in '84, and everybody was talking about him. So this was a time when you couldn't necessarily watch an Expo game. Times have changed, but going to the morning box score of his debut was a big deal for me. I think he had a matchup against the Mets, Ron Darling, where he actually won his first matchup against Gooden. He won. In fact, looking at Wiki here, he actually drew a walk against Wooden when he batted, which was kind of cool. But they very much played up those two. But the big thing with Yeomans was his walks. So he was plus in his rookie year, he had 202 strikeouts, but his walks were well over 100. He was doing the same in the minors. They always said if he could get control of his pitches, he'd be as good as Gooden, but that never happened. So yeah, that's what introduced me to it, and that's what got me involved. I think maybe long before analytics was looking at things like WHIP and walks to Ks and so forth. That's what got me thinking about what makes a great prospect pitcher.
And if I guess the next question from me is, if Floyd Yeomans was a prospect in 2022, what would be different about how we saw him, and what tools would maybe the organizations or someone like Driveline use to help Yeomans become a better player?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think he would definitely have the resources, a lot more resources today to gain that control. But I think the same thing would be with these pitchers who have great stuff, like a DL Hall, who has great stuff, but is he ever going to gain any control over what he could do? And I think even with somebody like Hall, you have control just doesn't have to do with walks, right? It has to do with where are you going to place it and how are you going to be hit. And sure. And he was hit pretty, he had some hard hits against him when he first debuted, DL Hall. But Yeomans was always tough to hit. So I think he would have been a different prospect if he came up with the resources we have today.
Sure. I imagine, I know the Mets had obviously they had a great pitching staff, and one would assume a good kind of minor league developmental staff, but the Expos, as we all know, were really operated on a string, had very little money. And I imagine someone like a Floyd Yeomans on the 22 Dodgers, right, in that organization, or in the Rays organization, right, or in the Cleveland organization or the Seattle organization, that kind of arm. I think that those organizations would take that arm and really mold it into something different. And that's a topic that I want to cover, over different podcasts is, why is it that those teams have that ability to take an arm and turn it into something different? Why is it that Kyle Harrison, right, came in as a kind of a third round semi-injured left-hander that threw a low 90s fastball with lots of sink, and immediately in the Giants organization started throwing 97 with all kinds of ride and a great slider with tons of depth, right? They immediately turned him into a different pitcher. But had he gone to, a different organization, had he gone to the Angels as an example, would he become that pitcher? I think it's really interesting to think about. And for me, there's some sadness in some of the players that I think could have been great and could have made an incredible living if they played in a different era. The player that I chose to highlight in that light is, I think, very much falls in that bucket, and it's Mark Newfield, who was the 6th overall pick by the Seattle Mariners in 1990. As I stated, I was in junior high at the time, huge Mariners fan. Mark Newfield was going to be the next great thing for me. I was so excited that we had the 6th pick. Here you have, I grew up in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. Here you've got this African-American outfielder, 6'4", 205 out of California. Like, he's going to be the next great, right fielder, the next great left fielder for the Mariners. Roger Youngward, who was the Mariners vice president of scouting and player development at the time, said he's a power hitter with a very exciting bat. He's the type of guy who could be hitting cleanup someday. We look at him to play left or right field. One of the scouts that scouted him said that Newfield's future as a first baseman was bleak with the Mariners because they were already loaded at the position with Alvin Davis, Pete O'Brien, and Tino Martinez, which in hindsight, AD was already kind of on the downside. Pete O'Brien should never hold back a prospect. But Tino Martinez was a player, when you look at his stats, very much should have been the first baseman for the Mariners, to end his career. So here's the part that gets dicey for me, and here's where I think there are a lot of mistakes made 30 years ago that we don't quite make anymore. You see them on occasion, but not anymore. So scouts compared, this was an article in the LA Times when Newfield was drafted. It says scouts compared Newfield's swing and batting stance to those of Cincinnati Red slugger Eric Davis and Darryl Strawberry. And then Compton, the scout, said he holds his bat similar to Davis. Others compare him physically to Dave Winfield. But I think Mark will be someone that people compare to other players, or people compare to other players someday. Hopefully he's a guy who in the year 2010 is still playing and hitting 30 homers and 100 RBIs. Here's my issue. And here's, again, kind of to pre-frame some of the conversations down the road. Every outfielder that was named in those comps were Black, right? Every outfielder that were named in those comps were very physical. They had a ton of physicality to their game. Eric Davis was, 6'3", and he must have been only 180 pounds or so. But he had a season of 37 home runs and 80 steals, right? Eric Davis was a physical, he could have played any sport, and he was fast, strong, great arm, like a skinny Bo Jackson almost, right? Dave Winfield was drafted by 4 major sports leagues: baseball, NFL, NBA, and ADA, right? And then Strawberry just had prodigious power. Mark Newfield was none of those things. He was Black and he was tall and he was big, but really the comp that I made at the end of my write-up on Newfield was JD Martinez. And JD Martinez isn't physical. He's just a great hitter. Mm-hmm. So to start, I think that scouts, when I read about what scouts had to say about Newfield coming out, I think they were completely off base. And to me, those are very, in hindsight, those are very lazy comps. I think when you see a player comp to 5 different players of the same race, right? If you have a Latin player who's comp to other Latin players, as an example, we're not digging enough because you're missing a whole pool of players. The other thing is that he had nothing, his game had nothing was nothing like Eric Davis or Darryl Strawberry. Eric Davis was a power speed guy.
Mhm.
Darryl Strawberry was, he had speed, but really what was he? He was a powerful 40 home run hitter in the middle of that lineup with an amazing arm in right field. And
Mhm.
Newfield was just, to me, could have been a professional hitter. So he was drafted 6th. The top 10 in that draft was Chipper Jones, Tony Clark, the current player union head, Mike Lieberthal, the catcher for the Phillies, Alex Fernandez, the pitcher out of Miami, Kurt Miller, Newfield, Dan Wilson, catcher on the Reds, who ended up as a Mariner, Timothy Costo, who I don't remember. That's the first one on the list I don't remember. Ronnie Walden, and then Carl Everett, one of my favorite players, was number 10.
Mhm.
So Newfield had pedigree.
Mhm.
He, a couple of things that I wanted to add. So he, as a 17-year-old in 1990 in the Arizona Fall League, he had a triple slash of 324, 401, 514 in 185 at-bats. In 91, in high A and double A, he had a triple slash of 286, 384, 433. That's 466 at-bats as an 18-year-old in high A and double A. He was named the number 2 prospect in the Cal League by Baseball America behind Pedro Martinez.
Hmm.
In 92, he was in double A, and after 162 at-bats, he had a toe injury that required season-ending surgery. So he repeated double A in 93, and in 336 at-bats as a 20-year-old, he hit 307, 374, 530. Okay. So you see this hitter who's on this progression of being a 300 hitter with probably, 360, 370, 380 on base and potentially 500 slug. And then in 94, they moved him to AAA and he hit 349, 413, 593 in 430 at-bats. This is with Calgary, and Calgary was a notorious hitter's park. So you've got a 21-year-old in AAA who's hitting 350 with a 1,000 plus OPS, right? Now, it doesn't matter if the park is a launching pad. He's still killing it. So the Mariners had brought him up in 93 for a cup of coffee for 66 at-bats. He hit 227. In 94, they brought him up for 38 at-bats. He hit 184. In 95, they brought him up. So in 95, they brought him up, and then he was traded with Ron Vallone for Andy Benes. I was sad because I loved Newfield, and I thought Newfield was going to be great, but I was excited to get Benes, and Benes proved to be a huge a horse for the Mariners down the stretch, chasing the wild card playoff in 95, which saved baseball in Seattle. Newfield went on to, to be a platoon bat in San Diego at the end of 95, hitting against lefties. And then in 96, he was traded from San Diego to Milwaukee, again with Vallone and Bryce Floyd for Greg Vaughn. Then he was released by the Brewers in 98. Out of baseball by 2000, he was 27 years old. His best season in the majors was 96 between the Padres and the Brewers. He had 278, 332, 446, and 370 at-bats.
Why did he have limited chances in MLB with the Mariners? Was he blocked or how did that work out?
He was blocked. So he was blocked by, I have the list here. So Griffey and Buhner were in the outfield, in center and in right. And then Edgar was the DH. So it was either first base or left field. First base was manned by Tino Martinez. The Mariners had Rich Amaral, who was a right-handed utility player, was fast, very little power. Darren Bragg, who had pretty decent on-base skill, but was a left-handed bat, so you could conceivably platoon those two. They traded for Vince Coleman after the Mark Newfield trade. And so Vince Coleman ultimately became their leadoff hitter. And then they had Warren Newsom and Gary Thurman at times as well in the outfield. So really, they opted for a platoon of Amaral and Bragg, and then ultimately Vince Coleman over Newfield. I wrote in my column that if it was me, I would have planted, given his statistics in the minor leagues and given the leadership of the Mariners at the time, where you've got Tino and you've got Edgar and you've got Buhner and you've got Griffey and you've got, Alex ended up coming up at that time. Newfield could have kind of been in the background and got his feet wet. I would have given him, with that kind of talent, that pedigree, I'd have given him 500 plate appearances in left field and just seen what you can get out of him, right? Because he had the statistics coming up to do it. Obviously, the Mariners. So here's one other variable, is that the Mariners manager at the time was Lou Piniella. Lou Piniello's my favorite manager the Mariners ever had, but he was notoriously against playing young players. And so Newfield really never got that chance. And I think he was typecast by the time he was traded as a platoon bat. But he was still only 23. He was in 96, that season with the Padres and the Brewers. He's only 23 years old. Do we give up on first round picks with those kind of statistics in the minor leagues at 23 these days? Absolutely not. So a couple other quick things about him. I think that given what we have, same thing what we talked about with Yeomans, given pitch recognition and how we teach that these days, how we can cater or kind of tinker with the swing to get the right launch angle, because he wasn't hitting a ton of home runs, but he obviously had incredible bat to ball skill. And then some of the other metrics that we use to develop swings and swing path, I think Mark Newfield could have been a star. He wasn't as physical, like I said, as some of the other players he was comped to, but he had the makings of an incredible, like, professional hitter. And that's why my comp was JD Martinez. JD Martinez wasn't a competent MLB player until age 26. And Newfield was traded and labeled as a platoon player at age 23 and was out of baseball by 27. So I loved him. I wish I could have stuck up for him, and in those days. I just think that he's a player who had talent that in 2022 would have been capitalized on. And I don't know what he's doing these days, but he's $100 million player at this point in time. If he could have become, even 90% of JD Martinez. JD Martinez went on to, as of 5,807 at bats, 277 home runs, a 288, 352, 519 slug, and a career stats. And I don't think that's that would have been out of the realm of possibility for Newfield as well. So here's to you, Mark Newfield. And here's the scouting.
A few comments on that. I'll work backwards here.
Sure.
So you mentioned stats, and I think this is going to be a key discussion all throughout this pod. I'm not opposed to minor league stats. I think sometimes we get this lazy thing that minor league stats don't count, right? Or we shouldn't pay attention to them too much. But I think that comes from people identifying, the 27-year-old hitter in AAA who doesn't have pedigree that, that's just launching them out, right? So I think part of what I've been learning, and hopefully what I learn and what we talk about in this pod, is identifying when stats matter and how we link stats to talent. So I thought it was interesting how you linked his stats to his pedigree and talent. The second thing here is prospects with teams that are in a race, right? And it depends on the organization, but the Dodgers are a good example. Do they give their hitting prospects enough at bats at the MLB level? And does that hurt them eventually, like a Lux or so forth? And that's contrasted with an organization like Atlanta, which seems to have the guts to bring them up like a Harris and Grissom and just let them play and give them consistent at bats. So that's those were cool points. And then the issue, I think, of justice issues in MLB and even in analysis, right? So what you mentioned about these comps that were given, that over time they are unfortunately racist and race-based, right? You see a fast wide outfielder. The comps are going to be other fast wide outfielders, right? A black second baseman. The comps are going to be looking for other black infielders, right? And that's rather unfortunate. I think it's important to see color, right, and to recognize diversity, but at the same time to make these lazy comps based on race, I hope is something that is avoided in the future. And then the fourth thing I wanted to say too, and I think this from your daughter being in softball, and I come from a softball family. Travel ball is huge, and that's a justice issue as well. We see players come up with privilege that are well trained just because they have that privilege. We see other talented players come up without that privilege of travel ball is extremely expensive. So I hope to see in the future MLB sponsoring that more at younger ages, giving kids a chance who don't have the money for travel ball, and addressing that socioeconomic issue.
Mhm. It's so this is an issue that, again, another topic we could address in a different pod, but I think, like, what's the difference in development between an 18-year-old like a Jackson Holiday, right, or Drew Jones being drafted in the States, and his play travel ball up to 18, versus a 16-year-old July 2nd international signee who maybe didn't have the nutrition or the instruction up until 16 years old, but then has 2 years in minor league ball, whether it's Dominican League or in the stateside, where they're in the complex and their profession and their school is literally baseball. So there's this developmental curve of, American or Rule 4 drafted players, right? Like a Drew Jones or a Holiday. That's kind of, I would call it pretty linear, their development. And then you've got this development of an July 2nd international signee, where you go from very few resources to 24/7 baseball. And I don't know if anyone's done a study as to whether one impacts the player more positively or not. But to me, that's really, really interesting, and something that we don't talk about enough, right? People will be critical of a 17 or 18-year-old international signee as being raw or not having the quote unquote fundamentals, but they didn't have anybody coaching them. And some of them, the story about hitting a tape ball or a string ball is like real, right? So sure, they may not be fundamentally there yet, or even mature and brought up in the ways of playing baseball, quote unquote, the right way. But I think that these are all things that hopefully are starting to go away, and we're starting to even that playing field out a lot more. But it certainly does impact the way in which we look at prospects. And I think the way in which many prospect professionals or prospect experts look at prospects, I think it clouds it, right? Mm-hmm. We see Pipeline, not to go off on a tangent, but we see Pipeline, they're notoriously high on Rule 4 draftees. Their prospect lists reflect whether you were drafted in the first round or not. Mm-hmm. And then you see someone like BP, who spends a lot more time, I think, in non-American places watching baseball, or at least mm-hmm. make an effort to, and send people to the Dominican. And you see a lot of the international players a lot higher on their list. And I think it's because they're doing their due diligence and looking. So anyways, these are all topics, we're kind of spitballing, but these are all topics that I think are really exciting, and we will cover as time goes on. Mm-hmm. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back with our current, our top 20 prospect list individually. Matt, actually, it's our early top 20 list for 2023 is what we're going to call it. We'll compare, we'll have some arguments. I don't have Kyle Manzardo on mine. We'll just give a little preview there, but we'll be right back. So our individual early 2023 prospect lists are based on dynasty and keeper leagues. So we're talking about rostering these players and being able to, if you prioritize them, roster them for their entire careers. Let's start with 20 through 16. Who is your number 20 prospect, Matt?
Okay, and I just want to say something from the start too. So keeper dynasty, I also think head-to-head matters as well. So I do lean a little more towards head-to-head. So I am looking for consistency, consistent players. And the other thing, as far as before we jump into the lists, I'm very walk K oriented, as going back to the Yeoman story, both with pitchers and hitters, and especially hitters. I very much like the Mookie Betts model as far as looking for walk to KI, looking for great contact and hard hit, all put together. So I'll give you my And then the other thing as far as I think positionality does matter. So, and I know this is always a debate, but to me, I'm always looking for, in building a team, having the Joe Montana, Steve Young ideal of having two players at each position, kind of the Jedi and then the potential Jedi and then the apprentice under the Jedi. So my list covers at least two players for each position throughout. So on kind of rankings, I don't know, rankings are tough. I like to categorize them more. So anyway, Tristan Casas is 20 for me. Tamar Johnson is 19. Tamar Johnson is my only 22 draftee here. I have Curtis Mead at 18. And I have our favorite debate here, Kyle Manzardo, as 17. And I have my one proximity player, Josh Young, at 16.
Right. Let's get this started here. Actually, I should give some of my own not qualifications, but filters real quickly. I look for prospects that, from a fantasy standpoint, where speed is a non-zero. I will value a player that can get me 10 to 20 steals, much higher than maybe a player with no speed, but a little bit more power. So Marco Luciano would be a good example of a player that isn't fast enough, probably isn't going to steal enough for me to prioritize. I like the 2020 player and I look for that. Same as you, looking at walk rate, K rate, hit tool or bat to ball, ability is incredibly important. That's pretty obvious, but I think I may prioritize it even more. Proximity is less important for me. It might be a tiebreaker, but it's not going to be the end all. I think we see prospect lists where proximity is almost like the number one thing they look for. Organization and potential park are very important. There are different types of developmental staffs on each team, as we talked about earlier. And then pitching wise, this is obvious too, but how many elite pitches do you have, or potential elite pitches? And then where is your command on the developmental spectrum? Because command doesn't have to be perfect right away, but we have to know that you have the ability to make some progress. It's why I'm low on DL Halls. I don't know that he'll ever have command, even though he has 2 elite pitches. So that was real quick. So my 20 to 16 is at 20, I have Diego Cartaya, catcher with the Dodgers organization in high A ball. At 19, I have James Wood, the outfield first base prospect for the Washington Nationals. 18, Ken Waldichuk, the left-handed pitcher in the Oakland A's organization. 17, Robert Hassel, outfielder in the Juan Soto trade that went to the Nationals. And then 16 is Marcelo Mayer, a 19-year-old shortstop prospect in high A ball, or now I guess double A, for the Boston Red Sox. So I've got to ask you, you got 2 Tampa Bay Rays hitters in your top 20, and which, when I look at the way Tampa Bay doles out plate appearances amongst their hitters, they currently only have 2 hitters, Randy Arozarena and who was the second one that I said? Randy Arozarena and
Diaz, right?
Oh, Yandy Diaz are the only 2 hitters who currently in the Rays or Rays major leagues have 400 or more plate appearances. Obviously, Wander Franco would too if he was healthy. But I worry with Rays hitting prospects whether they actually will have the opportunity to be full-time fantasy players despite their talent. What's your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, so I agree. It's Brujan. You get players coming up that that not only aren't going to play as much, but are going to be blocked as well with Tampa, right? Here's what I like about Tampa. So you mentioned this earlier with organizations. They have a philosophy. They bring in players based on that philosophy, and they're confident that they could teach players. So Diaz is the perfect example, right? Taken from Cleveland, they saw something in Diaz that Cleveland didn't. They thought they could teach him launch because he had what they value: hard hits and zone contact. And initially he came up and he was supposed to be a fantasy superstar, right? He had that fast start once he was with Tampa. He had injury problems that year. He never really reached that level, but he didn't necessarily have pedigree, right? Paredes the same thing recently. Somebody that makes great contact in a Detroit organization. Not necessarily, I don't think his hit tool was ever evaluated that well. Not very fast, as you said in the other pod as well. But he didn't have pedigree either. But they're confident that they could train him up, right? Same thing with their pitchers, with their philosophy. You could take somebody like a Springs from another organization, start him as a reliever, and then move him to a starter. Just based on their philosophy, they make him good. He didn't have pedigree. My argument with both Manzardo and Mead is that they do have pedigree, and these are two prospects that were scouted by their team based upon their philosophy that they could take from the start and take somebody with baseball background and pedigree and athleticism, especially somebody like Mead, Australian football player. And they could basically start fresh with these talented players and have them focus on hard hits, all fields. And I think it's showing there. So Manzardo, for example, if we take the top 125 prospects, he's in top 10 in hard hit out of the 125 prospects, 34% hard hit, 16K, 14% walk, that's elite. His swinging strike, which I really like swinging strike. I like zone contact once you get in the majors, but I just want to know the hand-eye of minor leaguers, right? They're going to reach out for pitches, but I want to know when they do if they can make contact, right? So I think swinging strike is key. So swinging strike, he's always between 7.2, 8.3. That's elite for minors. So that's Manzardo himself. All fields, 44. Pole side, 34 center, 21 right. His stats, support this as well. One of the highest OPS in minors, well over 1,000. His on-base percentage, well over 400. His slug over 600. His WRC, which does WRC plus, which does take into effect park factor, right? 173, 184, and once he got to AA, it's 154. So that's, even his lowest is 50% above minor average. And then Mead, who is the better athlete, same thing as well. Baseball America sees him as the best hitter in the minors, as far as the combination of 60 power, 60 hit. And so he does have that pedigree that probably Manzardo doesn't have. Why I put Mead in here is this is kind of a benefit of injury for me. They were playing him a lot at third, Mead a lot at third over moving from AA to AAA, and then he has the right elbow problem and they shut him down for the year. I think that's going to move him potentially more towards second. So I think his value is not at third for me, but I think he could be valuable at second, a solid 2020 guy at second, which is really hard to find right now.
Sure. So where does Manzardo, as far as like first base fantasy rankings, where does he peak? Right? If in 3 years, if Manzardo is the player that you think he is, where would you rank him on that list?
I would put him I see him as a floor of a 300 hitter. Again, that's up for debate as far as how is the game going to change next year.
Sure.
20 home runs at least. And I see potential consistently over 900 OPS. But again, that has to do with, playing time and what's going to play out in Tampa. For me, with prospects, You know, and I got a lot of flack about sticking up for Miranda early. You know, the question was, is Miranda going to play a lot? To me, if you hit, you're going to play. I don't care what organization it is, and if you could demonstrate yourself as an elite hitter, you're going to play for Tampa. So that's what I'm betting on.
Do you trust Tampa to give Manzardo at bats against left-handers?
Yeah, his splits are pretty solid. And so I don't think that's a huge concern. He's all fields as well.
So when obviously I'm not as much of a believer in him as you are. And I think part of it though is when I'm looking at a list of fantasy baseball dynasty first base rankings before the season started. And I'm going to go down the list and tell me where you think Manzardo falls on this list currently. So Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
We're looking at what I would project his prime to be and how that prime would fit in right now or currently.
I'm thinking more like if you're going to value, we can do both, right? What do you think if you were to accelerate his development into age 26 season? We can do that, but we can also do where would you rank him on amongst dynasty first basemen currently?
Okay.
In a dynasty league. So Vlad Jr., Freeman, Olson, Alonso. All right, so this list has Torkelson at 5. Would you take Torkelson over Manzardo?
No.
Okay.
I think, but at the same time, Torkelson is a wonderful buy low. I would buy low on Torkelson
for sure. So this list has Kirilloff. I don't think Kirilloff matters anymore.
I like Kirilloff a lot, but his wrist is shot, so
Chris Bryant.
No, Bryant. But again, this has to do with age. My fantasy team's young, so
you would take Bryant over Manzardo? No,
I would not.
You would take Manzardo over Bryant?
If we're planning for a dynasty league or our league, I would take Manzardo over Bryant.
Goldschmidt.
Oh, hell no, I wouldn't take Manzardo over Goldschmidt.
Andrew Vaughn.
I would take Manzardo
over Vaughn. Despite Vaughn's hard hit, are you worried about Vaughn's launch angle still then?
Yeah, his launch. I think Tampa could tap into Manzardo's power more than Chicago could tap into Vaughn's power. I think Manzardo has a better eye, and I think they're both equal when it comes to contact.
So you like Tampa Bay's home run rate then, and the ability to hit home runs?
I knew that was coming. Well, look at Paredes, right?
Sure.
Yeah, look what they did with Paredes, just like that. So
I do think Paredes is showing like 65, almost 70 power right now. So there is that. I think he is a stronger player. Cronenworth.
And I would even go back to so Manzardo was the first baseman taken last year, right? And he had the positionality bias, right? Everybody said he's a masher, but he's just a first baseman, which we see a lot. So I think looking at Baseball America prospectus scouts on Manzardo, the big thing is we know he could hit it hard, but is he going to have power? So this is where stats come in for me. So I want to look in his first year, how is his slug going and how are his home runs going, and even doubles, right? Because for a younger hitter, I think doubles are going to say a lot as far as that. So he's not like. He has 22 home runs now. His doubles are high, so he's not like this power hitter that has 7 doubles, right? And his slug is 631, so he's passing that test so far. But I still think it's a question, right? That's why these are prospects, and it's something to have on the list to see if it could be taught.
So interrupt me when there's someone that you would not take Manzardo over. Jake Cronenworth. Max Muncy. I'm assuming these are no's until you interrupt me.
Okay.
So Cronenworth, Muncy, Jose Abreu, Jared Walsh, Kyle Schwarber, Rhys Hoskins, Ryan Mountcastle, Josh Bell, Tristan Casas,
I
CJ,
I I would have him and Casas
similar.
yeah, and Casas is the opposite. He has this power that we all know about. How is this hit going to be?
CJ Cron, Ty France. And then I think everyone else on this list, we've got Jose Miranda, Vinny Pasquantino, Miguel Vargas, Nathaniel Lowe, Nick Prado. So I think
Yeah, to make comparisons, right? So I think I think bringing up Miranda is interesting, and then Vinny as well. I don't think Miranda or Vinny have the pedigree Manzardo do. So I'd put, even though I roster Miranda in all leagues, I would put Manzardo above Miranda easily, because
it sounds to me like you've got so Vlad Jr., Freeman, Olsen, Alonso, Torkelson's 5, Goldschmidt 6, and really that's about it.
I would have him between 7 and 10.
Okay, that's fair. I have not done as extensive in-depth work with Manzardo as you have. I happened to be in Seattle this weekend, and we had a couple of beers and had a heated conversation about Kyle Manzardo. Most of it was just me ribbing you because you like this hitter that I think is going to top out at about 20 home runs and hit about 260 or so. I called him Mark Grace 2.0 and got a good reaction out of you for that one. But yeah, I think Manzardo's interesting. I worry that in the Tampa organization, the way that they function, the minute he doesn't hit left-handers, they're going to put Harold Ramirez or someone like that as his platoon partner. And
that's a valid argument. And that's where I think need is interesting, because I tend to value righties in the Tampa organization more than lefties.
And I think they can potentially play against both.
Need has better floor when it comes to at bats when it comes to Tampa.
So I guess real quickly, I'll go through and highlight a couple things in my 16 through 20. I've got Diego Cartaya at 20. He's got huge power. Everything you read about Cartaya is that he's an incredibly powerful player. But it's hard to see him get time with Will Smith entrenched at catcher with the Dodgers. And so he may need to be traded in order to fulfill his potential, but I still think he's deserving of a top 20 spot. I do not have Francisco Alvarez in my top 20. I think Cartaya is the best hitting catcher prospect that in the game. Alvarez, I think he's got a bad body. I could see him putting on even more weight, and he's a player that they're not completely confident in his ability to stay at catcher defensively. He's got big power in the bat. I do think he'll benefit from the outlawing of shifts because he's such a predominantly pull hitter, 50+%. But I'm not ready to rank him above. I think Cartaya has a more comfortable, more linear development. Cartaya is 6'3", Alvarez is 5'11", I think. He just fits more of what I look for in a catcher that's going to be able to hold up for, 100, if he's a good hitter, 110 games behind the plate and maybe another 40 games or 30 games as a DH. James Wood, we can cover a little bit more. I just think at this point, he's kind of a lottery ticket, and it's hard for me to really get behind a 6'7" hitter just because the long limbs can get in the way sometimes. But Aaron Judge is kind of proving us wrong with that. Dave Winfield, as we talked about earlier, was 6'6". But Wood being in single A right now and being in an organization with the Nats that I don't love from a minor league development standpoint, I'm going to put him in the top 20 because of his talent, but not, I can't get too high on him right now. Hassel at 17 is an average, I think, defensive center fielder, above our plus corner outfielder. I think it's going to be a 2020 guy. I could see him hitting 300. Going to the Nats hurts his prospect value for me, but he's still worthy of top 20. Marcelo Mayer, we all kind of know, left-handed hitter in the Red Sox organization. He is the first example on my list of the valuing speed if speed is a non-zero, that's important for me. I don't think Marcelo Mayer is going to steal more than, say, 5 bags a year. So he better hit 290 to 300 with 25 to 30 home runs at shortstop. But I do think he has at least peak years of that. And then the one player that in this list of 5 that I really do love is Ken Waldichuk. Putting him in the top 20 is probably, I didn't do it as a hot take, but I think people would see it that way. He's got what I see as, I previewed him in our baseball and coffee kind of sister pod last week. He's just, man, when you dig into Waldichuk, what I see is a potentially 3+ pitches and someone that strikes out a whole hell of a lot of hitters. And he's also moved from a New York park that was a kind of average hitters park, but surrendered a ton of home runs, to the best pitcher park in Major League Baseball. Just real quickly, 3-year rolling park factors for New York. Hitting overall is 100, home run is 116, so 16% easier to hit a home run. 113 home run for right-handed hitters and 122 home run for left-handed hitters. Oakland, 3-year rolling, 94 overall, so 6% more difficult overall for a hitter. But home run is 77 park factor. So it's 23% more difficult to hit a home run in Oakland than it is Major League average. And then for a right-handed hitter, it's 70 home run park factor, meaning it's 30% more difficult for a right-handed hitter. So you're taking this left-handed pitcher and putting him in Oakland, right? So you would expect an increase in his ability to suppress home runs. He's got a nasty fastball and slider. He's got 7 feet of extension on his fastball, which is near elite. And he's got a whole bunch of movement on his fastball, his changeup, and his slider. And he hasn't shown tremendous control and command problems yet. I just think he is a pitcher that we're sleeping on right now, and for me, worthy of a top 20 rank. Any comments on those guys?
I just have questions as far as Hassel. So one of the critiques is his performance now that he's gone to Washington. It's pretty bad, right, as far as statistically. And then he had this similar critique as far as his power goes. So he was like, well, let's wait and see this year and see how his power turns out. So how would you I wouldn't question his hit. I wouldn't necessarily even question the steals, just because steals are going to greatly change next year. He's a great base runner, smart player on the base paths. But my question is as far as his power. So how would you address that?
I think so. The video that I watched a bit of video on Hassel, and interestingly that you bring that up, because what I saw was that he has elite pitch recognition, which allowed him to kind of change his swing based on pitch location. So you'd see him, kind of slap a backdoor breaking ball from a right-hander into left field, right? And then you would see him really kind of leverage himself to try to pull like inside fastballs. And so his swing would change based on where the pitch was located. And I assume what his kind of predetermined approach was. So my answer to your question is, does he have kind of natural power where he has the same swing all the time and he's just trying to hit the ball hard and 25 of them are going to go out? No, I don't think that's the case. But I do think because he has elite pitch recognition, he's going to be able to kind of jerk out, 15 to 20 home runs each year, just because he sees the pitch so well. Is he ever going to be 25 home runs? I don't think so, but not based on what I saw. He's probably going to be a more valuable real life player than a dynasty player, I think, because he does provide great base running. He is a very good outfielder, maybe not an elite center fielder because of he doesn't have the physical attributes, I think, to be an elite center fielder, but I think he's a good enough hitter to be ranked in the top 20. He's also a beneficiary of all the graduations to the major leagues. and I think he's an asset for the Nationals. And I think he's a good, in our league, a 16-team league where you start, where we start 3 outfielders and have a utility position. For me, is his peak or his ceiling is probably, a high-end outfield 2. But if you roster him and in 2 years you expect him to be a productive outfield 3 on a championship team, I think that's realistic.
Mm-hmm. And I think he's one of those players too that is going to be affected as far as where he is positioned in the lineup. So if he's in a good position in the lineup, I think especially those counting stats are very much going to help. And if the Nats develop their hitters, that could very much be the case.
Mm-hmm. Who are your 15 through 11?
Okay, this is where we're going to have the catcher. I didn't comment on your Cartaya. Cartaya comments because this is coming up. So I have Cartaya at 15, but I also have a Harry Ford note here, and I have doubts about Cartaya. I have Alvarez at 14, and again, if you look, Alvarez isn't on your list. Mine is still pretty low on my list compared to most lists, right? Even prospect centered lists, right? So we could have our catcher conversation over those two, but I definitely have Alvarez above Cartaya when it comes to hit. Luciano I have at 13.
Mm-hmm.
Marte I have at 12. These two guys we were talking about the scouting, and I think I could put Alvarez in here as well. Scouting versus performance, scouting and stats, scouting and metrics. These are the question marks, right? These are 3 very high on scouting marks, Marte, Luciano, and Alvarez, that aren't necessarily performing yet, according to how they've been scouted. So I put all 3 of these together, and then I put De La Cruz at 11. Ellie De La Cruz.
Cool. My 16 through 11 or 15 through 11 are Grayson Rodriguez at 15. I have Cam Collier at 14, picked 17 by the Reds in last year 22 draft. I think 16 or 17. His father's Lou Collier, for those old heads out there who remember Lou Collier, the utility player for the Pirates. Cam Collier's got a great bat. Bat first, left-handed slugger, third baseman will probably stay there. It's a little high, I'm sure, compared to a lot of other prospect rankings, but the reality is that I think his bat is for real, and it's already a consistent bat. At 13, I've got Jordan Lawler, AA shortstop for the Diamondbacks. 12 is Jackson Holliday, number 1 pick in the draft of 2022 by the Baltimore Orioles. And then at 11, I have Kyle Harrison, left-handed starting pitcher for the San Francisco Giants, 21 years old in AA. Let's have that catcher conversation.
All right.
So funny because I feel like I was high man on Harry Ford coming into the season. Maybe it's because I'm a Mariners fan. But a lot of it for me was some of the positional flexibility and feeling like he could accumulate 550 at-bats at the catcher position. But let's talk a little bit about what he's shown this season and then where you fit him in with, say, in a 24 prospect list if Cartaya is not up yet.
Yeah, so going back to strategy with positions, right? So I want my catchers to be different than anybody else's catchers. That's where I think I could do well in head-to-head. Somebody who stands out that could give me something interesting when it comes to counting stats or even percentage stats. So Ford is there as far as that goes. He could be unique with stolen bases. He could be unique with on bases. On base is incredible this year. I think he has 80 walks now. He's well over 400 on his on base percentage. What stood out to me, and this may be a homer thing, I like Seattle as well, and a homer thing when it comes to scouts, but DePoto isn't going to mess around when it comes to talking about players, right? He said his scouts had, prior to the draft, had Ford at 65 speed and 70 potential power. Is he exaggerating? I don't know, but but this is coming from real scouts, not Fangraph scouts. So he's a high schooler coming in, so there's that goes with development. I just think it's incredible that somebody has that plate discipline and pitch recognition this early. And what makes him unique as a catcher is he could play all around, right? He's played mainly catcher in the minors right now. I think Seattle sees a uniqueness here. I think they're committed to him. They don't want to pull him off catcher at all. But I could see him playing multiple positions just because of his athleticism. So he could play that unique role with a lot of at-bats as a catcher. I like that when it comes to the consistency factor. When you do have a catcher that is going to have 550 potential at bats, that matters a heck of a lot. Even the top catcher like Will Smith, right? How many PAs does he have this year? So I like Ford a lot. I would almost replace for Cartaya with Ford. Sure. I texted you about that.
So real quickly with Ford, so this year he has 54 games started at catcher and 49 games started at DH. To your point, I think they want to develop his bat more and get as many plate appearances as possible. And you're right. He in Modesto, which is single A. This year he's 274 with a 425 on base and 863 OPS, in part because of that on base, 23 doubles, 4 triples, 11 homers, and 23 steals. But he's got 88 walks and 115 Ks, right? So you see pitch recognition, you see explosiveness as an athlete, which aren't things that we typically say when we're talking about catchers, right? I think you're right that there are a lot of people who are sleeping on him, and
his swinging strike is 10%, by the way, too.
Right, which is almost elite.
Yeah, for a 19-year-old, yeah.
So Cartaya, if we're talking about Ford and Cartaya at a similar place from a ranking standpoint, what is it you see in Cartaya that gives you pause?
First of all, and I think this is good for our initial discussion as well. When we look at BA and BP prospectus, they're not as they make money with fantasy articles, but they're still committed to looking at the player overall. There's some categories with players that don't fit in with fantasy, and the one is defense, right? So the big thing always on Cartaya is he could be a field general, Gold Glover, as far as a catcher goes. So I think that ups him on both those lists. And that gives me a little pause. They do talk about his ear ringing, contact, mature hitter, manages zone, recognizes pitches. There are criticisms of how he's able to deal with pitches away, struggles with pitches down and away. His all fields approach is actually worse than Alvarez. He's at 50% pull side. And he's older than Alvarez as well, right? So he's 21, and he's not at AAA, which Alvarez is. Alvarez was 19 and 20 at AAA and AA. So he's the better defensive catcher, obviously, than Alvarez. Alvarez is going to DH a lot. You could see that in the Mets draft. They already have a top 50 catcher from their draft, right? So that shows kind of how they're viewing it. I think Alvarez was rushed by the Mets. I'd be critical of them. Their catchers stink at the major league level. I think they were rushing him through to get him for the playoff run. And you don't do that to a catcher that's 20 years old, right? The learning curve for catchers is just extremely high, right. Especially if you want them to be field general. So I think there's a little bit of poor management of Alvarez there. But yeah, I don't see in what you mentioned about Cartaya with the Dodgers, what's going to happen. His value is going to go up if he's traded. But again, he's one of these players that is blocked by other players in the Dodgers system. And his let's see, Cartaya, he's pitch recognition. He's at 14% walk rate, 27% K rate, which is a little high. Swinging strike is 12, 15 in that range. It's very similar to Alvarez there. So Yeah, I see Cartaya a little exaggerated because of the defense. And the other thing is, to me, and this comes with, I agree with Cam Collier. I love Collier. What gives me hesitancy is I want to see these players come up through a AA and then kind of pass the AA test. Artaya hasn't passed the AA test. Alvarez passed the AA test last year at age 19.
Mhm.
He's struggling in AAA. He's not passing the AAA test, but he's been injured and rushed, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah.
So let's take a quick break. We'll come back, talk a little Ellie De La Cruz, and give our top 10.
Zone contact.
I wanted you to finish the thought. All right, we're back. Anybody else in 11 through 15 that you wanted to talk about?
Not necessarily I think when we get to De La Cruz, I think that's the
So
I think
Kyle Harrison is not in your top 20.
I love Harrison. I love Tiedemann. Both of them are not in my top 20.
Mhm.
It doesn't reflect the player, it just reflects my philosophy. Our starting pitchers go. I don't like to invest heavily in young starting pitchers just because there's volatility there. I could see both of them becoming one aces, or two in a rotation, but it's just my philosophy. I want to look for that elite, sure one starter, and that's the only thing I'll invest in when it comes to top 20s.
Got it. I did have Harrison at 11. This season in high end AA's, 108 innings with a 2.75 ERA, 49 walks. So his walk rate was pretty high, about 4 per 9. But he struck out 180 batters in 108 innings. The 115 WHIP. The things that I like about him, he's got a tremendous mid to high 90s fastball with a ton of ride, and an elite slider with a lot of depth that he can back foot a right-hander with. He's really a fun pitcher to watch. He's got that low 3/4 arm slot, not quite Chris Sale, but kind of, when I think about a lefty coming from that slot, I think about Chris Sale. And the other thing is, he's coming out of the San Francisco Giants organization as a pitcher. And I think we know now that the Giants have some voodoo as far as being able to develop pitching, and Harrison has been the beneficiary of that. So when you take age, 21 years old at AA, the strikeouts that he's putting up with pretty decent command. I know he walked 49, but it's not as if he's wild. The organization that he's in, the home park that he'll pitch in, and the fact that he's got 3 pitches instead of 2, which is something that I look for in starting pitching. Harrison's my number 11, and I look forward to him. I think if not starting in the rotation with San Francisco next season, definitely coming up pretty quickly.
I like what you said about arm angle there, especially versus lefty hitters. If you're a lefty coming up against them, you're pretty much dead.
Yep.
Unless you're elite. So yeah, I love that, and that matters in the park.
So your I guess 10 through 6.
Okay, we'll talk about Ellie because Ellie's in your next. Okay, so my 10 through 6. So this is where my pitchers come in. I have Painter at 10. I have Mayer. Is it Mayer or Meyer?
I don't know. I can look it up.
Okay. At 9, I have Lawler at 8, and this is where we differ as far as placing a player. I have Wood at 7, and I have Chourio. Did I say that correctly as well?
Jackson Chourio.
Chourio at 6.
All right.
Marcelo Mayer.
There we go. Did you hear that? It's Marcelo Mayer.
Mayer. Okay. And just a note, not Mayer, but 8, 7, 6. I like their talent, but they don't pass the AA test yet. Lawler, I know it has started AA just recently, but that's why I see these as great athletes, but not passing the test yet.
Got it.
Especially Chourio.
So my 10 through 6. At 10, I have Yuri Perez, 19-year-old, 6'8" starting pitcher for the Miami Marlins. At 9, I have, I almost said Lance Painter, former left-handed reliever for the Phillies. I have, and Cardinals, I think too. Andrew Painter, AA, starting pitcher, 6'7", 19 years old.
That's the closest we've gotten to as far as you have them at 9, I have them at 10.
At 8, I have Jackson Churio, 18-year-old outfielder in high A for the Brewers. At 7, I have Termarr Johnson. At 6, I do have Ellie De La Cruz at 6. So let's see. Let's start with Painter Perez. What's your take on those two? You had Perez over Painter or Painter over Perez? I forgot.
I have Painter. I don't have Perez in my top 20.
So let's start there. What is it that you see or don't see from Yuri Perez that has him outside of your top 20?
3 things I'm looking at as far as performance. I don't question his talent and how he's scouted, right? And again, this has to do with my bias as far as pitchers. What I look for in pitchers as far as being that elite of elites, and for me, that's what has to be what you need to be to get in the top 20. You need to have the control. You need to have at least shown that you're starting to master that. And he's passing that. The Ks have to be there in light of the walks. Low walk rate, high K rate. He has that. But the third thing is how are players hitting him? Is he fooling players at the level that he's at? And this is where I would put Painter above Perez. Painter is fooling hitters. Perez is not. Perez has gotten lit up, at least a few times this year. And he's showing a little wear, and they've been cautious about him. It's not like they're overusing him. So that just gives me a little concern. I don't want to be overly harsh on him. I like him a lot. I owned him at the start of the year. I traded him pretty fairly, and I got a good round pick from him, and I cheer for him. But I just think Painter right now has that elite stuff, and has that hard time of being hit when you approach him. And I would say the same thing about Harrison. I would put Harrison above Perez too, because he's going to knock you out when you come up. You're going to have to do something creative to especially if you're a lefty against Harrison.
Does the park, or does it go ahead? Sorry.
And Painter has that 60 control at least, right? And that was the question about him coming in. How is his control going to be as a 19-year-old? And he's passed that test so well, especially as he's come into AA, right? So his walks to Ks right now, 2 walks and 32 Ks in AA, and passing that test.
So he obviously is a different pitcher than George Kirby or Aaron Nola, but he has, when you have that type of command, it, from a fantasy perspective, it really does give him an incredibly high floor, and the ability, it's easier to invest in a pitcher where you're going to get something that's valuable and usable from day one, because they have that kind of command. They're not going to kill your whip out of the gate, because they're walking a ton and getting hit hard. He might give up some hits, but he's not walking anybody. And so at minimum, I'm looking at a sub 115 or sub 120 whip out the gate from a young pitcher, which you don't ordinarily get. I think I like Perez a little more than you do. I see that he is getting hit hard. I think that, he has pitched the same number of innings this season as he did last season when he was in A-ball. When I'm looking at it, I see that he's given up 63 hits in 75 innings this year, and he gave up 43 hits in 78 innings last year. I don't have the batted ball metrics, but oftentimes, as we know, hits can just be a product of luck and placement or park. His K to walk is very similar over the past 2 years. So, is he the uber prospect that I think we were talking about at the beginning of this year? I don't know if he's an ace or a number two or even a number three. He's a three is probably his floor, but yes, I think that his recent performance would give me pause. I would also like to see the pitch metrics over his starts when he's been getting lit up, because sometimes that's indicative of potential injury, right? And that's something to think about as well.
How many home runs did he give up this year?
How many home runs? He's given up 9 this year, and he gave up 7 last year.
Okay.
So, but he was
so
also,
you're not looking at elite there. So like Tiedemann's given up 3, right? Harrison is like low single digit too, isn't he?
I think Harrison's given up. Maybe I'm just thinking about the futures game, but Harrison's given up 13 in 108 innings.
Oh, wow. Okay. But he's had a lot of innings though. That's still,
yeah. And the other thing with Harrison is I think it's a really good point to talk about, whether you feel like hitters are getting a decent look at a pitch. And Perez, I think at times they can get a decent look. There's not a ton of deception. It's just kind of more of this huge body coming at you. With Harrison, there's a ton of deception. And he's right now, he's doing a really great job of tunneling his pitches. And I think that's why he's so hard to hit.
I think Painter's at 3 home runs. I think he's given up 3.
That's wild.
Hence has given up 1 this year. But he's at single A.
We'll talk about him next year for sure. For sure. Jackson Chourio is kind of the flavor of the month in a lot of ways, or flavor of the year. Everyone's been really high on him. He's in both of our top 10. I know he's young, he's powerful, he's got great bat speed. There is a bit of swing and miss. The 3 things that give me pause. One is the swing and miss is pretty high right now. He has 14 stolen bases this year, and he's still a pretty slender guy. And so I wonder if as he fills out, those stolen bases dwindle even more. And if you're talking about a 5 to 7 stolen base guy, again, like I said, with Marcelo, you better hit. And so there's a little bit of pause for me in terms of him not having the speed that I look for in an elite fantasy player. But obviously he's got tremendous, he's a tremendous hitter, and is, I think at this point, because he's 18 and in high A ball, we need to rank him in the top 10.
He's tapping into power a lot on the pull side too. He's 51% pull.
Real quickly with Tamar Johnson, again, he's 18. I'm ranking him at 7. So he's a player that I really, if I had to stump for one of 2 guys on this list, Tamar would be one of them. They talked about his hit tool being an 80 coming out, or one of the few that they've ever really seen as an 80 hit tool. Left-handed hitter, played shortstop in high school, is definitely a second baseman in the majors. But he just can hit. If I think kind of the average season from him, I anticipate I'm looking at a 300 hitter with 25 home runs and 10 steals at second base from him. That's what I see. Do you see anything different? I know you love Tamar.
I love him too, and you drafted him ahead of me this year. I remember that pretty early too. I didn't think you were going to do it, but yeah, he's second base is a clusterfuck right now. I can say that on a pod, right?
You can.
Yeah. So and it's almost definite he's going to be there. And he could be that. I really don't even care about stolen bases with him. If you could give me 300 plus 25 home runs with the pitch recognition and 900 OPS at second base, I don't care if you're a third. He's not a 30 speed, but right. he could get you anywhere from 5 to 12 stolen bases, right. just because of his athleticism. So he's I'm not going to argue with that. The only reason, as I said, he's the only player that's from the 22 draft that's on my list, and I have no problem with him here in the top 10.
It's I like where that offense is headed in Pittsburgh. I think that they're doing a pretty good job of developing hitters now, and he's their number 2 or number 3 hitter for the next, 10, 12 years if he doesn't leave Pittsburgh. And in fantasy wise, if you can find an infielder, I'll just say not even middle infielder anymore. If you can find an infielder that's going to give you that kind of performance that's head and shoulders over the rest of the players at that position, to your point about catcher, you really put yourself in a position to succeed, especially in head to head. All right. So our beloved Ellie De La Cruz, 20 years old, listed as a shortstop currently in the Cincinnati Reds organization. He's 6'5". He's a switch hitter. Nobody expects him to remain at short, especially with Noelvi Marte and Edwin Arroyo entering the organization. I think best case scenario from a fantasy perspective is that he stays at third, or he lands at third. More likely in my mind, he's a right fielder. Incredibly explosive, maybe the best athlete in the major or in the minor leagues potentially. Really fun to watch. Definitely in my mind, the most exciting hitter in minor league baseball right now. This season, he's 300 in I think high A and double A. He's 300, 355, 588 with a 943 OPS, 28 homers, 43 steals, a 7.8% walk rate, and a 30.6% K rate.
Mm-hmm.
So
why is going to go 30-30, which is pretty cool.
Why isn't he number 1?
For me, it's the question is the swing and miss, right? Is he going to be a player that's going to come up and swing and miss over 200 times in MLB? And the discernment is not that there's anything majorly wrong with that. If you are going to go 30-30, Tatis doesn't have a very good swinging strike rate, right? But he's still very different than a Baez who always leads in swing strike. So for me, it's discerning that is he a swinger like Baez or is he a swinger like Tatis? Mm-hmm. And if he's like Tatis, he should be number 1. But the question mark is still there for me. The other thing I wanted to say about him when it comes to scouting, I found interesting. I think Baseball America made this comment: coaches and scouts consistently rave that his understanding of the game may be as impressive as his tools. So you have this teachability factor, and you have this focus on always improving. He's just not relying on his tools. And Eric Davis, I think, not coming from a scout perspective, but a front office perspective, has said the same thing about him.
Mm-hmm. So what are we looking at peak and floor with Ellie De La Cruz? So obviously you don't see him reaching his peak talent, and his floor is probably pretty low. I guess I'll answer it. I'll put myself out there and answer it. I think we could see a player that's a 230 hitter for a couple of years with, double-digit home runs and double-digit steals, and then flames out because he can't, because he's got too much swing and miss. Mm-hmm. And I also think that he's maybe the only player outside of Tatis that we can legitimately say has 50-50 potential.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that. Highest ceiling, lowest floor for me when it comes to the top 20 lists here.
Right. So, I don't always love Fangraphs tools ratings, but I do think it's telling that De La Cruz's hit tool, according to Fangraphs, is a 40. Mm-hmm. So it's 40 hit, 80 raw potential, which is pretty wild to think about. I kind of hedged in putting him at 6 because I think that given his season and his age, for me, it was almost unfair to leave him outside of the top 10. I just think that he's proven in double A, high A and double A, that the talent is real. Mm-hmm. But I'm not putting him in the top 5 because, maybe it's my Mariners bias, but I think of like a Jared Kelenic, right? Mm-hmm. Who came up and put up great stats and just immediately he just couldn't do it. And I think when there's that level of swing and miss, it's a it's a real possibility that major league pitchers can exploit that to the point where you just simply can't reach your potential. If he puts up, even if he puts up another season like he had this season, and he's got a above 30% K rate, I'm going to continue to say I want to see it in the major leagues over time to really consider him elite or an absolute superstar. Obviously, I think of him as kind of elite at 6. There's just a ton of volatility.
Mm-hmm. His swing and strike went from high A to 17 to 13 in double A. So he is showing improvement there.
But you wonder too, like if you're in a higher altitude park, right? I don't know that that's the case, but a higher altitude park could change the ability of a breaking ball to break. There's so many different factors with regards to, minor league parks. For me, it's hard to draw anything from those types of shifts unless it's over time or unless it's in the same park. All right. The big reveal, 5-1. Who do you got from 5-1?
5-1. I just wanted to say one thing about James Wood.
Sure.
As far as going from scouting to performance. So the big thing with Wood, he was seen as probably the best athlete in the draft. And the big question was the hits and the long levers, which you mentioned. But he's passing the test that the scouts put out there as far as swing and strike is elite, 10 to 9%. He's got a fantastic eye and pitch recognition so far. So that's why I would put him up there. He has both the scouting talent and the performance to back it, the skills to back it. But as a Nats fan, I question, how consistent is their system for building a consistent hitter.
Right.
Especially with Brady House, I'm seeing what has happened to him.
Right.
So my top 5, I have G-Rod at 5. I have Walker at 4. Henderson at 3. Volpe, who is initially at the start of the week, my 4 is down to my 2 now. And then I have Corbin Carroll as a number 1 prospect in MLB.
All right. I have Jordan Walker at 5. Noelvi Marte at 4. Gunnar Henderson at 3. Volpe at 2. Carroll at 1. So we agree on we have the same top 3. This was not planned for anyone listening here. Let's start at 5, or let's start with Walker. You said Walker was your 4 or 5?
He's my 4.
Okay. So Jordan Walker, 20 years old in Double-A, St. Louis Cardinals organization, was listed as a third baseman. He started playing a lot of corner outfield. I think that they see him coming up pretty soon, and with Arenado kind of entrenched at third, even though I think Arenado has an out on his contract at the end of the year. I think they're seeing the writing on the wall with Walker that he's more of a corner outfielder than he is a third baseman. He's 6'5". The only 6'5" third baseman I can think of would be, I think Alec Boehm is 6'5", and Scott Rowland, I think, was 6'5". Those are the two that come to mind for me. And Boehm, they question whether he's a third baseman, and Rowland was one of the best defensive third basemen of all time. Walker is high. He's had an incredible season this season. He's a really great athlete, great arm, tons of power, speed. Some of the things that give me pause, he's running a really high BABIP this year. And, those are the kinds of things where we get excited about a player hitting 300, but we don't always dig. I wonder if his hit tool, is it a 45 to 50 or is it a 55 to 60? And if it's a 45 to 50, is he going to be able to hit high level breaking stuff? I think really his speed is going to wane as he gets bigger. And from him, he does have an 80 raw and probably a 60 game, 55 game right now. But he's got to hit 35 home runs to be 30 to 35 home runs to legitimize this rank. I do think I think he'll reach that, but there's some questions that I have with Jordan Walker still.
Yeah, there's questions for me as well. I initially had him when we were thinking about this pod a couple weeks ago at number 2,
Mhm.
but just his hard hit is elite. He's come out with a max 116 EV this year, which is elite when it comes to max, but his average is very high too. He's at 32% hard hit, so he's top 10 out of all the top 100 when it comes to hard hit rate. I like his walk rate, 11%. For his age, his K rate isn't bad, 22%. I get cautious when it gets over 25, but 22, I would like to see it under 20. Swinging strike from in A ball was 11 as he moved to high A was 17, and double A now in 22 it's 16. He hits to all fields 39, 39, 21, which I like. But yeah, I have the same concern as far as his contact. Is he a 50 to 60 hitter, or is he just at 50 or below when it comes to his hit tool? There's also talk of whether he's first base as well. I know there's block there, but could he end up there as well? I'm not sure. I didn't look into his arm, as far as corner outfield. Would they keep him in outfield because he has a good arm? But
He's got a phenomenal arm.
phenomenal. Okay.
Yeah,
So
he's got. I've seen some highlights of him throwing guys out. He's got a very good arm.
yeah, so it'd be a waste to put him at first base.
As of right now, yeah. One thing I do like, just looking at his stats in Double A this year, in 438 at bats, he has 51 extra base hits. So he's got 30 doubles, 3 triples, and 18 home runs in only 438 at bats. So there's obviously tons of extra base power. He had 19 steals this year. Like I said, I expect that to come way down. He's 6'5", 220 right now, and usually a player who's that big at 20 years old will only get thicker and probably slow down a bit.
One shout out to St. Louis too, as far as their system goes. I love how they just kept him at Double A all year this year. That was smart. And I wish, going back to Alvarez, New York did that with Alvarez. Just keep him at Double A.
Let him be comfortable, do his thing.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
One shout out to Julio, just because I have to. His game tying home run on Saturday, of which the game of which I was at, was over 117, and I thought that was pretty crazy in the 9th inning to tie a game up off of Kenley Jansen to hit a 117-mile-an-hour home run. But love me some Julio. All right, so at 4, who was your 5 again?
My 5 was G-Rod.
You want to talk a little bit about how he's your SP?
He has what I look for. Obviously he's evidence of the volatility of SP when it comes to health, right? You never know. But scouts have always been high on his ability to locate in all 4 quadrants of the zone. He's able to manipulate his pitches quite well. I like how he kind of has that what both Cabrera and Luzardo have in Miami. What do you call some of his pitches, right? So he's creative with his pitch mix. His change is even like a screwball. It moves quite uniquely. He's a pitcher, not a thrower, is what you hear a lot from scouts, which I like to see as uber elite. As far as pitch goes, his fastball is at 70, slider at 70 pretty consistently with scouts, change at 65, control at 60. His curve is 55, so that would be kind of ranked his 4th, but still over 50. How's that going to develop? I don't know. I love how Baltimore is developing their players as well. They've moved from an organization with a reputation of not doing that to one of the better organizations of doing that. So I'm a G-Rod fan. I traded him in the offseason. I regret it. I wish I just had been patient and kept him.
He might be a decent buy low at this point, given the lat strain that's taken him out for most of the year.
Yeah.
I also think he's a huge any pitcher in Baltimore is a huge beneficiary of moving the fences back, because that's changed the dynamic of that park so much. For me, I've read and seen, the things that you talk about with Rodriguez. I guess I've just never I've never valued him in the same way that others have. And which is funny. I don't really know why, because I'm one who does value a third pitch, right? And does value command. And he's doing all of those things. Maybe it's Baltimore hangover, where I just can't get behind Baltimore prospects because of how we've seen their organization for years. I need to get ahead of that because I understand that they're a lot different with development now than they used to be.
I like that Baltimore hangover.
Yeah, I got a Baltimore hangover. No one would, if we use that in common context, no one would have any idea what I was talking about. All right, we've got about 9 minutes to get through these top four. I guess I should speak on Noelvi Marte being at 4. I know that's probably the highest of anywhere. He's still in high A. He's 20 years old. I saw him play in Tri-Cities earlier this year when he was still a Mariners prospect. This year, 20 years old, he's got 19 home runs, 23 steals. He's got tremendous power. I don't think anyone debates whether he has power. He's currently a shortstop. I could see him playing second or third with the Reds. I think Arroyo, if he continues to hit, will be their starting shortstop ultimately when they're good. The big thing with Marte that I think people underrate if they don't really watch him too much is that he's so smooth. And he's such a professional already in a lot of ways that people see him as lazy. And I do think that he was a bit disinterested in being in A-ball again when I saw him, right? Is a little bit of the going through the motions. But he has, the other thing is his hit tool, I think, is a bit underrated as well because of his batting averages. And I think that if you watch him hit, I see a 290 hitter when I watch him hit. He's got a beautiful swing and the ball just jumps off of his bat. So
he's my favorite swing out of all the 20 players.
He's got an incredible swing. So you take a player like Marte, who was a bit disinterested earlier this year, who's been a top 10 prospect in the past. There might be a little prospect fatigue with him already. He's going to put up a 2020 season as a 20-year-old. And he's now in a park in Cincinnati that surrenders tremendous number of home runs. It might be the best park to hit home runs in Major League Baseball. And there's going to be opportunity because there's really nobody blocking him. They're going to find a place for his bat. So I believe that, 2 months into next year, we're going to see Marte as a consensus top 5 prospect. I think he's going to come out on fire in the first couple of months of next year. And maybe by the end of the year, he's their starting. I guess he'd probably move to third or stay at short for a while, given their love with Jonathan India. But Noelvi Marte is my number 4. And as a Mariners fan and someone who's watched Marte over the last couple of years, seen him in person, I just think that he's a prospect that's getting lost on a lot of lists. And I think it's unjustifiably so.
One of those examples of people that are very stat driven in their analysis. They ignore him and forgets how he's scouted and continues to be scouted.
You look at his, just see him in person. He's broad shouldered. He's got kind of the broad shoulder, narrow hip build, a little bit narrow, he's widening a little bit. And so they talked about him not being in shape, which was ridiculous to me, right? Look at him. He's clearly in shape, but he's just I don't know. Tamar Johnson's probably my first love as far as the prospects on this list, but Noelvi Marte is right there. I think Marte is I don't think he's going to steal 20 bags in the majors, but he's a 30 home run, 15 steal guy as an infielder, which is incredibly valuable.
You're going to go get on the phone this summer and try to get him?
I will. I absolutely will. I tried already. I probably made 4 or 5 offers for Marte over the past 18 months. Yeah, I'll try again. All right. So 3-1. We both have Gunnar Henderson at 3. He's currently the starting third baseman for the Baltimore Orioles. They just called him up in September. He's 21 years old. In my mind, he's a 2020 player. He's a good hitter. He's lacking speed a little bit. He's definitely a corner player for me and not a shortstop. I think if they try to put him at short, they're putting a square peg into a round hole. A bit of, no, I wouldn't call him a pop-up because I think he was wasn't he a high second round pick, I think?
Yeah, second rounder.
but a player who's really changed his approach and his swing a bit coming into 2022. I'm not in love with him in the same way that others are, but given the fact that he's already in the bigs and he's produced a bit in the bigs, I put him at 3.
Mm-hmm.
How about you with Mark or with Henderson?
Yeah, and he has that hard hit 34.7, so he's top 5 with the great contact, right? So when you strike 10.6, 8.4, that's elite power, all fields, uses all fields. He's interesting at third base. He's not going to be that power guy at the corner, but he'll be that consistent guy at the corner. Scouts, as far as any holes, the couple things I found was watch his ground ball rate, that seems to be increasing, and watch how he is versus lefties. Yeah, so he isn't. I think he as a player is kind of defined. You're talking about the pop-up thing by a move that was made by the player that has Gunnar Henderson in our league, because he had Cowser at the start of the year, and he cut Cowser to pick up Henderson in the first week. And so I think that says a lot, that Cowser was kind of that hit guy with great eye. You know, Cowser has done great in AA now, but it was kind of Cowser popped down and Henderson popped up when it came to Orioles hitters. So yeah, I have no problem with putting him at 3. I think he has a great floor.
And just for transparency, the only reason I have him, I think Marte is a better player. I think Marte, in my opinion, will end up a better player. I have Henderson above Marte only because of proximity. Henderson's in the major leagues. Marte is in high A. Do you have time to take a quick break and then come back with the last 2? I don't want to shortchange our top 2.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We both have Anthony Volpe at 2 and Corbin Carroll at 1. I don't think that's too far off of consensus for a lot of folks. Maybe Volpe is a little high, but Anthony Volpe, let's compare Volpe to Henderson for a minute. They're both 21. Volpe, I think, could very easily be brought up to the Yankees major league team. If they really wanted to. They interestingly brought up Peraza and Cabrera above him, leaving Volpe at AAA. What's his upside for you? What do you see as kind of a standard season from Anthony Volpe in the major leagues? And then what kind of peak do you think he can reach?
So this isn't a comp, but Bo Bichette, we were talking about this earlier. He's a consistent player. What makes him good also is the lineup, and that raises his ceiling. So I see the same thing with Volpe's consistency. I see Volpe better than Bichette, just because of his walk rate, swinging strike. He sees his contact. He's not so much hard. He's more selective hard hit. I don't know how you would describe that. He could get high EVs, but he uses all fields. He's a hitter, so his EV is going to be reflective of that. So he actually has the same EV as Adley did last year, and that was the critique of Adley, right? But Adley's a hitter too, right? With great eye, great pitch recognition. I move Volpe up because of above Henderson because of the new rules. Just hearing broadcasters, especially players, talk about what's going to happen with SBs next year, especially with minimizing not only how much pitchers could throw over, but the pitch clock too. You can't wait. So you see that all the time this year now, how long a pitcher is going to wait if that base stealer is on first base. Volpe is his baseball IQ is the highest of any player here, I think, as most scouts would say. He's going to take advantage of that. So even though his speed isn't like this elite speed, his base running is. So I could see him being easily a 290, 25 player in the Yankees lineup. And for me, that's incredible. I also see, I know we disagree about this, Baseball America, interestingly, has him listed as second base. He does have that second base intrigue if Peraza is the better defender.
Mhm.
You know, but Volpe does have that kind of the it factor that may keep him at shortstop. But I am intrigued of he'd be incredible second baseman. He'd be the number one second baseman easily if he slotted over there.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I have no problem putting him at 2. At the start of the year, I had him as the potential number one player going into 23. So
Mhm.
his slow start, you know, that was the transition to AA. I love that he made that transition, and he's just raked ever since May, June.
Mhm.
He's raking in AAA now too.
It's one of the things that I look for in prospects is how they respond to adversity, right? You got prospects like Kelnick who always hit. And then his first real adversity was being brought up to the Mariners, and he didn't really know how to handle it. I don't know that he does still. And so with Volpe, yeah, he did kind of, you know, he had these huge expectations coming into 22, and he fell on his face a bit, and he figured out how to kind of get his feet underneath him again, and has had another really great season. I agree with you. I think what I have written in my notes is 2020 is, I think he's a player we can pretty much count on being a 2020 player, but he's got 30-30 upside because he does have some explosion as far as his swing goes. And to your point, I think the baseball IQ plus and with plus speed allows him to steal bags. I don't know if the Yankees will let him run this much, but I could see seasons of 40 steals from him, given the rule change and the speed. The one interesting thing about him is that he's an extreme fly ball hitter. And so I wonder what might happen with him as far as, you know, is he going to be a slightly lower average hitter because of it? But is there even more power in the bat than we think? Despite those questions, I think he's, you know, to your point, to get a middle infielder, second or shortstop, who's going to put up these kinds of numbers consistently in a lineup like New York, when we've seen Bichette go first round in large part because he's in that Blue Jays lineup and he's, you know, 80 to 100 runs and 80 to 100 RBIs, almost guaranteed. Volpe is that kind of player. So if you were on the Bichette as a first rounder train, we're going to be saying the same thing in my mind, saying the same thing about Volpe in a year or two.
And Volpe with the better on base percentage.
Yes. And a lot different sort of swing discipline as well, which for me gives him a little even more upside than Bichette. And then for full transparency, Anthony Volpe was a part of a trade between Matt and I at the trade deadline in our 16-team head-to-head league. Volpe was the centerpiece in a trade where I traded away Fernando Tatis Jr. to Matt for Volpe, and Volpe, Edward Cabrera, Marco Luciano, and Robert Hassel III. What put me over the top in acquiring Anthony Volpe, this is not anything analytical. It's that he's half Filipino, as am I, and that actually got me really excited about rostering a Filipino player on my team. So number one, Corbin Carroll, 22 years old. He's up and starting and playing regularly with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Left-handed, 5'9", from Seattle, interestingly enough, Lakeside High School. In my notes, I've got high average, speed, power, top of lineup type of player. There's a little swing and miss in his game that gives me a little bit of pause, but I think before he came up and I could watch him every day, I may have had him slightly lower on this list, but there's a quick twitch in him that, and a power and a speed from someone as small as he is that I think is very rare. And he's a very incredibly exciting player to watch. And to me, a pretty clear number one prospect on my list. You roster Carroll. What is it you see in Carroll that makes him your number one player?
Yeah, so what attracted me, he was actually the number one overall pick in 2021. And I'm saying this as because some people laugh, so I kind of get justice now. But you didn't laugh, so
I didn't.
But his hit tool was outstanding. There was the bias, you know, he comes from Seattle, you know, I knew of him through the draft because of that. What I see in him is this incredible ability to hit the ball hard in the zone. It's incredible that somebody so, that is smallish.
Slight. Mhm.
Yeah. So Casas was at 40% hard hit. He's at 39. So he's number 2 out of all the prospects when it comes to hard hit. And he does have launch, right? So he's not, for a fast player, he could hit it in the air, which is key for I think his second home run was opposite field in Colorado. And that just, I thought it was a fly out, it was a hot day, but if he's playing teams like that and he could just, deceptively off the bat, you kind of wonder, but then you see it's over 100 EV and it flew off his bat opposite field. It's just amazing as far as the hit. And I think his other one was a hot day in Arizona to center field, which I also thought was going to be a fly to the wall, but easily got out. So he has this deceptive power, which I find interesting. What I also like, and I think this is future discussion too, for our pod, is wanting to see metrics happen more at the minor league baseball level, right?
Absolutely.
And one of the exciting things when players come up, besides just seeing their families, and when they come up, and that's one of the most, any sport, no sport beats baseball when it comes to prospects coming up, right? As they show their family. I always get teary-eyed when I see it, because the families made sacrifices for this to happen, and they're just so proud, whether the player strikes out or not. But anyway, why was I? Oh, seeing a player come up and then seeing the metrics on Savant. So seeing him like Witt, he's at the 100 percentile when it comes to sprint speed. And I saw him in the minors run around the bases, but I think you have the extra oomph in majors as well. So just seeing him run, I think Arizona's being smart too. He had the shoulder issue last year, which gave people hesitancy this year. So they're resting him against lefties. So he's playing maybe 5 out of 7 times a week. They see no reason to rush him. I also think they're being conservative with him on the bases as well. Why, if you're out of it, why overly risk it? You're not, Carroll isn't a Bubba Thompson where you're trying to prove that you have something to add in Texas. They already know he's fast. So I like their conservative approach with him. So yeah, I just see him as a good ceiling, high floor player that can consistently contribute for a fantasy team the next 10 years.
Is he or any of the 5 in our top 5 an MVP, major league MVP type player?
That's a great question. One of the things looking at the top 20, I don't think there is like a Tatis here, right? There is like this, or a Guerrero, right? But there are a lot of players that could have that 1 or 2 year stretch where they are this MVP player. But as far as like, the elites of elites, maybe not in this top 20. As we see these draftees come in from 22 and 23 has some great players too. Maybe that will happen more in the future. But I think if I were to describe this, these players that we're choosing, you've chosen, I've chosen, they're very high floor players, consistent high floor players coming up, but not at the like Tatis level.
I would push back a little. I think Jordan Walker and Ellie De La Cruz have that ability. I don't know that we'll see it from them. I don't think we see like the top 3 MVP guys, on this list, 1, 2, 3, but I think those 2 have that kind of upside. I think there are other folks that would argue that Churio might have it too. I think Volpe, maybe just given his exposure in New York and, playing shortstop and all those things might help. And if he did pop a 30-30 season and he's hitting in the middle of that lineup or towards the top, there might be a little bit of that. And then I'm not saying this because I roster them, but I think that Termarr and Collier are very underrated at this point in time and have the type of bat to ball skill and not explosiveness as athletes, but the kind of power in that bat, right? Explosiveness in the bat that they could put up some pretty ridiculous numbers down the road. But to your point, there's no Tatis, there's no Vladito, there's no Ken Griffey Jr. On this list as far as I can tell. But I still love so many of these players.
Mhm.
All right, man. You got anything else?
Not really. No, I enjoyed it.
This was super fun. So we'll be doing this pod hopefully weekly or every 2 weeks, coming up with some, obviously we came up with some different ideas during the pod. We've got some ideas that are already in the oven, and it's been fun to talk prospects, man. I think it's an opportunity to dream and get excited and get your heart broken. And we all know, you know, the examples of Floyd Yeomans and Mark Newfield show that it can be really difficult at times, especially if they're prospects for teams that you root for. But there's also a lot of excitement in you being the one to roster Corbin Carroll, or me being the one to roster Anthony Volpe, or, you know, watching a Noelvi Marte or Tamar Johnson become superstars. So this is our Miners podcast. Like I said, we'll be doing it once a week or maybe every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think I think our next one we could do once minor league baseball is over. I think what's that, week and a half or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Enjoyed it.
All right, brother.
Take it easy.
You too.